Let's talk about a new Capenna Commander pre-con spoiler with Henzie, the toolbox, Torre. Welcome to the Commander's Beacon. I am Eric, and we're all about unconventional commander decks and strategies on this channel. Today let's talk about another spoiler from Streets of New Capenna. It's Henzie, Toolbox Torre. Henzie is a 3/3 legendary devil rogue wearing pinstripe pants, and honestly that's a good enough reason to build this deck. But just to be safe, let's talk about a few more reasons. So what does Henzie do? Henzie costs black, red, green, and has each creature you cast with mana value 4 or greater has Blitz. The Blitz cost is equal to its mana cost. Also, Blitz costs you pay cost 1 less for each time you've cast your commander from the command zone this game. So Blitz is a new mechanic in New Capenna, and it's kind of like Dash, but arguably a bit better and a bit worse. I would argue that it's probably better most of the time, since you get to draw a card. A creature with Blitz can be cast for its Blitz cost, and if you do, that creature gets haste, and when this creature dies, you draw a card, and at the beginning of the next end step, you sacrifice the creature. Which of course means you draw a card. And Henzie gives Blitz to all of your creature cards, or at least the ones that have mana value 4 or greater. He also reduces that Blitz cost by 1 mana for each time he's been cast from the command zone, so at the very least it'll be a 1 mana reduction. And now, like many Junt decks, Henzie is going to promote a very creature-centric deck with a sacrifice sub-theme. And now Henzie is the face commander for the Streets of New Capenna commander deck for the Riveteers family, so we'll see soon how Wizards has built this deck. But there are a lot of directions you could go with Henzie, and let's go over some of them now so you're ready to start modifying that precon to your liking when you get your hands on it. Now the first thing I want to mention about the toolbox is that he's probably the centerpiece of any deck that he leads. And because Henzie needs to be sent to the command zone and repeatedly cast to maximize your Blitz cost discount, you'll need to carefully manage how big you let his commander tax get. And this is a pretty cool high risk, high reward payoff, since you might want to intentionally kill Henzie or just let him incidentally die so that he can go to the command zone and increment his Blitz cost reduction the next time you cast him. Of course, if the command tax gets too high, you won't be able to cast him efficiently, or maybe even at all. So again, really cool design with the risk-reward here. So in any Henzie deck, you'll generally want to play Myth Unbound, which effectively reduces your commander tax by half. For example, with Myth Unbound, if your commander has been cast from the command zone 3 times, the commander tax will be just 3 mana instead of the normal 6 mana. You'll also want to consider things like Netherborn Altar, Command Beacon, and Road of Return, each of which let you put your commander into your hand from the command zone. Now these notably won't increment Henzie's Blitz cost reduction, since they're not increasing your commander tax. But they're still a great way to make sure that you can cast Henzie again if you've let that commander tax get a bit too high and you're having a hard time paying it. Now since you're technically casting a creature with Blitz, you can supplement with any other effects that reduce the casting cost for your creatures, like Marauding Raptor, Heartless Summoning, and Nylea Keen-Eyed. I really like Marauding Raptor and Heartless Summoning here, since they reduce that mana cost, but also outright kill your small creatures in return. But since Henzie only lets you cast 4+ mana value creatures with Blitz, most everything that you cast will be big enough to survive your Marauding Raptor dealing 2 damage to it, or Heartless Summoning giving it -1/-1, so you can largely ignore the downside of these cards. There's also Goreclaw, Terror of Kalsisma, which has creature spells you cast with mana value 4 or greater cost 2 less to cast, so this is perfect with Henzie. It also gives your creatures with power 4 or greater +1/+1 and trample when Goreclaw attacks. Again, great for pushing in damage when you cast something with Blitz, since it'll have haste and can attack right away. There's Conduit of Ruin. Not only does it reduce the cost of your first creature spell each turn, but it also helps you find a big creature to cast with Blitz, as long as that creature is colorless. So those are some of the cards that you'll generally want to consider for any Henzie deck. But there are several more specific routes that you can take with this commander. Let's talk about some of them. Now when you cast a creature for its blitz cost with Henzie, that creature will be sacrificed at the end of the turn. But it'll draw you a card on its way out, so it's kind of like you're cycling the creature, but you still get its ETB effects or dies effects, so Henzie is a pretty decent value engine in this regard. Now creatures that recur other creatures from the graveyard will let you keep blitzing over and over and drawing you cards with Henzie. Like Entomber Exarch, which lets you return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand when it ETBs, or you can duress someone. Like Timeless Witness, which lets you return any card from your graveyard to your hand on ETB, and you can even eternalize it later. And as another example, there's Deadwood Treefolk, which is more expensive at 6 mana, but it lets you recur a creature card from your graveyard to your hand when it enters or leaves the battlefield, which again is great with Blitz. There's Artisan of Kozilek, which is even more expensive, but it just straight up reanimates a creature right onto the battlefield rather than putting it into your hand. Gorex the Tomb Shell is pretty cool here too. You might ideally exile 2 creatures from your graveyard with it as an additional cost to cast it when you blitz it into play with Henzie, so that blitz cost will be just 3 mana, or less depending on how many times you've cast Henzie from the command zone. Now Gorex will have haste, so it can attack right away, letting you put one of those exiled creatures back into your hand. Then Gorex will die at the end of the turn, letting you put the other creature back into your hand, on top of drawing you another card. Genesis is a great value card in any graveyard deck, and it's great here too, especially again since you can use Blitz to cast it with Henzie, ensuring that Genesis gets sacrificed and ends up in your graveyard where it belongs. Chainer Nightmare Adept lets you discard a card to cast any creature spell from your graveyard, and yes, that means you can cast it for its Blitz cost to effectively cycle it again. Now you can also use creatures that recur themselves from the graveyard. Several of the gods do this. Like Ilharg the Razeboar, when it attacks you get to put another creature card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking, and you return that card to your hand at the end of the turn. So first, Ilharg is great with haste, which it'll get when you cast it with Blitz, because you can put a bunch of power onto the battlefield and attack with it right away. But when Ilharg dies or is put into exile from the battlefield, for example when you sacrifice it at the end of the turn if you blitzed it into play, you put it into your library third from the top so you can keep reusing it over and over. When God Eternal Ronus ETBs, you double the power and toughness of each other creature you control until end of turn, and you give those creatures vigilance. Now unfortunately Ronus doesn't buff itself, so it can't take advantage of having haste in that regard, it won't double its own power and toughness. But it does have that Ilharg text to put it into your library third from the top when it dies or is exiled from the battlefield. And so does God Eternal Bantu, which lets you sacrifice permanents for even more card draw on ETB. Firewing Phoenix returns itself to your hand when it dies. It's also a 5/3 flyer for 6, so that's not super impressive. Ebon Death Dracolich can be cast from your graveyard as long as another creature not named Ebon Death Dracolich has died this turn. That said, Ebon Death Dracolich enters tapped, so haste won't help it. Masked Admirers returns itself from your graveyard to your hand whenever you cast a creature spell, for a fee of 2 green mana. But it also draws you a card on ETB, so again, it's a great blitz target. Now, there's also some creatures with great dies triggers, which are perfect for casting with Blitz. Rootless U lets you tutor a creature card with power or toughness 6 or greater into your hand when it dies. There's Vengeant Vampire. When it dies, you get to destroy a target creature an opponent controls and gain 4 life. And these are just a couple examples. There's a lot of support for graveyard reanimation in Jund colors, so we're not going to be able to cover all of it here. Now if you've got Sundial of the Infinite and you blitz a creature into play, and then you go to your end step and that sacrifice the creature at the end of the turn trigger goes onto the stack, you can activate Sundial of the Infinite in response to end the turn, and end result you'll get to keep the creature permanently. But then the creature doesn't die, so you don't get to draw a card, at least not right away, though if the creature dies later in the game you'll still draw. Because that effect granted by the Blitz ability that says, when this creature dies you draw a card, that doesn't go away at the end of the turn. But in any case, we want our blitzed creatures to die and get that card draw right now. So you can use these spells like Feign Death, Malakir Rebirth, Supernatural Stamina. These are cheap instants that just cost 1 mana, and when target creature dies this turn, you put it back onto the battlefield. And there's several more variants of these types of spells that you can fill your deck with. But there are other ways to let your blitz creatures die and then get them back. Mikaeus the Unhallowed gives all of your non-human creatures Undying. There's Cauldron of Souls, which can tap to give any number of target creatures Persist, so these are great ways to easily put those blitzed creatures back onto the battlefield after they sacrifice themselves and draw you a card. A lifeline is a bit risky because it affects your opponent's creatures too, but this artifact will put any creature that dies back onto the battlefield at the end of the turn, as long as there's another creature on the battlefield. Now when you play with Henzie, your creatures will die. But this isn't really an aristocrats deck, so things like Blood Artist won't typically do a lot of work here, because with Henzie, our blitzed creatures have to be fairly large at 4+ mana value. So we care about sacrificing a few big creatures rather than a bunch of little ones. Fortunately, there are a few ways to pay us off well for killing our own large creatures. Let's take Anax, Hardened in the Forge, as an example. This gives you a 1/1 Satyr token whenever a non-token creature you control dies, but you get 2 of those tokens instead if that creature had 4 or more power, which it likely will if it had a 4 or higher mana value. There's Karu Bloodsucker, which drains each opponent for 2 life and you gain 2 life whenever a creature you control with toughness 4 or greater dies. Again, our creatures just have to have mana value 4 or greater, but when they do, they'll probably also have toughness 4 or greater. There's Sultai Flare, which gains you 4 life whenever a creature you control with toughness 4 or greater dies. Witch's Oven lets you sacrifice a creature to make a food token, but if that creature had toughness 4 or greater, you get 2 of them instead. There's Ulvenwald Observer, which draws you a card when a creature you control with toughness 4 or greater dies. And now we can also take advantage of those big creatures entering the battlefield. There's Terror of the Peaks and Warstorm Surge. When a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you get to deal damage equal to that creature's power to any target. Where Ancient's Tread is similar, but it only triggers if the creature had power 5 or greater, and it always deals 5 damage regardless of that creature's power. And then there's Sarkhan's Unsealing. This enchantment hits any target for 4 damage whenever you cast a creature spell with power 4, 5, or 6. But if you cast a creature spell with 7 or more power, Sarkhan's Unsealing does 4 damage to each opponent and each creature and planeswalker they control. Again, casting a creature for its blitz cost is still casting it, so any of those casts will trigger Sarkhan's Unsealing, if the creature has sufficient power. And we can also take advantage of our 4+ mana value creatures entering the battlefield. Elemental Bond, Garruk's Pack Leader, and Garruk's Uprising draw you cards whenever a creature with power 3 or 4 or more, depending on the card, enters the battlefield under your control. Again, many of our 4+ mana value creatures will meet this requirement. There's Furious Uprising, which gives you card advantage as long as you control a creature with power 4 or greater at the beginning of your end step. And Paleoloth is even more graveyard recursion, letting you return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand whenever another creature with power 5 or greater enters the battlefield under your control. Now you can also play Henzie as a more typical, aggressive Jund deck by threatening your opponents with big scary creatures, since Henzie both gives you a discount to cast those creatures and gives them haste. Creatures like Etali Primal Storm, Archon of Cruelty, and Goldspan Dragon have amazing attack triggers that Henzie gives you instant access to because of that haste. Actually, you could probably build a Dragon Tribal deck pretty easily with Henzie, with other impactful dragons that love to attack, like Drakuseth, the Terror of Mount Velis, Atarka Worldrender, all these big nasty dragons that are really scary when you can give them haste. Now, as long as you're putting out these big, hasty threats, you can also give those threats some additional evasion. Cards like Thunderfoot Baloth, Ferocity of the Wilds, and Primal Rage give your creatures trample to help push damage past chump blockers. Dragon Shadow is really cool here too. This is a 2-mana aura that gives the enchanted creature +1/+0 and fear, so it can't be blocked except by black or artifact creatures. And whenever a creature with mana value 6 or more enters the battlefield under your control, you can return Dragon Shadow from your graveyard to the battlefield, enchanting that creature. So Dragon Shadow is really great here with Blitz, since when you sacrifice that blitzed creature that's enchanted with Dragon Shadow, the aura will go to the graveyard, so it'll be ready to come back into play for free whenever you cast another creature with mana value 6 or more. So those are some ways to build around Henzie. Again, I think this is a pretty open-ended commander, with a few restrictions. I mean, you will want to be in a decently creature-heavy deck, and a lot of those creatures will need to have mana value 4 or greater. Outside of that, you have a lot of options with Henzie. As we discussed, you can use effects that let you return those blitzed creatures to the battlefield after you sacrifice them, effectively giving you a cost reduction and card draw when you cast them with Blitz using Henzie. You can play with your graveyard using creatures that have death triggers and ETB triggers, along with some graveyard recursion. You could probably even play Dragon Tribal if you want, since many dragons are great with haste, and they have mana values of 4 or greater. And we've really just scratched the surface here. I think there's a lot you can do with Henzie, and I'm sure we'll see some more options when we get the full decklist reveal for that Commander pre-con. But that is all I've got for today. Let me know in the comments what you think of Henzie the Toolbox. You can also join my Discord, where you can discuss Henzie and other Commander deck building strategies, or maybe even play some games. If you enjoyed this video, please click that like button or subscribe if you haven't already. And if you want to support the channel, check out our Patreon. Thanks to all of my patrons, I really appreciate your support. Patrons get to vote on upcoming content and more. You can find the link to the Discord and the Patreon in the description. And thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.